Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you are watching this recording. But to those that are here in the live, good afternoon to you all. We're going to start shortly our next webinar within the Black First Gen at HBCU webinar series hosted by NASPA Region 3. And I'm so delighted to continue to be a moderator for these education or webinar series focused on HBCUs, Dr. K, Dr. Kelly Dixon. And today's topic will be socio-emotional wellness of Black First Gen students, primarily speaking from the context of HBCUs. And so as always, we're gonna give about 2 or 3 more minutes for individuals to start coming in the room. But as you all are coming in the room, those here live, please place your questions and comments in the chat. We're also gonna place in the chat the link for captioning. So if you need captioning capabilities, please utilize the link that we're going to place in the chat for you, and we will start momentarily. Again, thank you all for tuning in. We will start momentarily. If you are seeking caption capabilities, please utilize the link in the chat to access that accessibility. For those that are here, feel free to put in the chat where you're located, what institution you're representing, so we know who's all in the room. So excited to have you here. All right, San Diego State University, welcome. University of Memphis. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Continue to put in the chat. Okay, North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University, where I currently work. All right. So glad to have you all here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, if you are in need of captions, please utilize the link that is displayed in the chat. It will open in a separate window for you, as captioning is not shown on the actual webinar. So today, we have the pleasure of talking with, or at least I have the pleasure of talking with, you have the pleasure of listening to and engaging with some phenomenal individuals in this work as it relates to Black First Gen students from a socio-emotional wellness lens. And I'm so excited for them to be here. And so we're gonna get right into it with them introducing themselves and kind of giving context as it relates to their experience in being a Black First Gen student. So who wants to kick us off?
Ms. Ward, please get us started.
Of course. All right. So my name is Shashanah Ward. I am a licensed clinical social worker in private practice with my company, which is called Counsel for the Culture. I am a Black First Gen student, or graduate rather. I went to North Carolina Central University for my master's, and learning to navigate that space without guidance, being that I'm the first Black gen in my family, of course, difficult, and really didn't learn how difficult it was until postgraduate. So my experience was going to East Carolina University for undergrad and then graduate HBCU, which I think is a very different experience than having undergrad and a graduate experience at HBCU. So that is where I come in.
Yes, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Kimberly Walker. I am the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs at the South Carolina Technical College System Office. And Ms. Ward and I have a similar background in that I went to a PWI for undergraduate and master's program and got my PhD from North Carolina A&T, Aggie Pride. And so my experience is that of a first-gen student who, of course, identifies as Black or African American, but also as a single teen mom and low income. So I checked all the boxes. And so I'm excited to be here, share my experience with you all, and I look forward to feedback along the way.
Awesome. Okay. So when it comes to, let's first start with this concept of socio-emotional wellness and defining what that is. And then let's talk about defining that in the context of being a Black first-gen student.
Okay, so socio-emotional wellness, many different factors that fall into that, under that, navigating social situations, emotional development, managing communication, just having an overall life balance. As a first-gen Black first-gen HBCU student, I would say not having good socio-emotional health impacts you in a way because you don't know how to show up in those spaces, right? So when you think about coming from, this doesn't apply to everyone, but coming from a space where what happens in this house stays in this house, right? So you're not used to communicating what's going on with you in spaces. So when you're trying to navigate and have a positive socio-emotional health within a school system and you haven't learned those particular tools within your own household, it's very difficult, showing up in that particular space.
And not even just that particular space, but you said something that's really important that we tend to forget about, or people tend not to know in terms of the Black community, is that whole concept of what stays in this house, what's said in this house stays in this house, and how that transfers into the college experience for Black first-gen students when it comes to mental health, comes to struggling in different aspects of the college space, that, oh, I can't reach out to anyone because I have to keep it all in, and how it impacts student success. And so my next question in this conversation is, what messages are we really sending or not sending to our Black first-gen students at HBCUs, given the culture of the Black community and the culture of HBCUs?
Ms. Ward, do you mind if I hop in here? I was thinking the first thing that came to mind is this idea of socio-emotional wellness is really almost a new phenomenon in terms of being actively promoted across social media and being an expectation and the use of self-care and mental health days. All those things are relatively new. I think where we are as collective missing the mark a little bit is that we didn't start with actively dismantling some of those poor coping mechanisms that we've been using before we got to college and in college. So to tell me, you know what, you need to learn how to take care of yourself. And all I know is to be a single mom with 5 classes and 3 jobs. I didn't even know what taking care of myself looked like. Not only that, I got a lot of positive reinforcement for wearing a cape, being super mom, super student, super worker. And so it's hard to deal with that tension mentally in terms of getting all this positive feedback for running yourself ragged, but then also the acknowledgement that you need to take time for oneself. So I think that's where an opportunity lies, particularly with Black first gens and especially at HBCUs, because we pride ourselves in knowing our students and being able to truly help them from where they are, right? That's not just a buzz phrase, but really knowing our students' background. I think we skipped a step. I think we need to go back and talk about how do you unlearn some of those coping mechanisms mechanisms that had largely positively impacted you, because here you are in college, right? And how they aren't going to be very helpful moving forward. I think unlearning the bad behavior is where we have to start here.
Yeah, definitely. And even what you said, Dr. Walker, about wearing the cape, right? So we have this strong complex, which impacts our ability to be vulnerable. So when you think about things that's going on in your life that may impact how you're showing up in a classroom, if your professor isn't aware of those things, like culturally, that this is something that you struggle with, being able to advocate for yourself isn't very easy. As an adjunct professor, I've worked with Black first-gen college students in settings that weren't HBCUs, but my ability to see when they were struggling was important, because I would reach out to them and say, hey, I'm noticing that this has changed. Tell me about what's going on. And it definitely was a struggle to get them to be open about what's happening in their personal life that's impacting how they're showing up in the classroom. Because again, we're not really taught to be vulnerable. You're taught to be strong, keep it pushing. You don't have, time to sit and cry about things, but we have to continue moving. And that definitely impacts your ability to be successful in an academic setting.
And both of you have said some things that I want to kind of dig a little deeper in. One, unlearned behavior. That some of us, to be honest, we don't even know that it's behavior that we need to unlearn because we're so used to it. And then the concept of advocacy, not just self-advocacy for that Black first gen, but how do we as professionals in these college campuses, particularly HBCUs, advocate for our Black first gen? And earlier, Dr. Walker, you mentioned you checked all the boxes. So if we can kind of have this conversation around what are the boxes that are being checked for first gen? What does that really mean? And then what are some ways that we can promote advocacy for our students, but also for professionals working with Black first gens at HBCUs that encompass that socio-emotional wellness or well-being?
So I'm going to take the first half of the box aspect of it, and then Ms. Ward, I'll let you kind of take the other piece of how do we convey this message to folks. So when I talk about boxes, we use that language about students who are at risk, right? And what does at risk mean? I was at risk in all of the ways you could be at risk. So I am from South Carolina, and regardless of what we say, every part of it is rural. So rural, low income, Black, single teen mom, going to the largest research one institution in our state. It was like dropping somebody off in the middle of nowhere and like haul and tail in the other direction. And so when I talk about those boxes, what I'm really talking about is the ways in which our society has failed to support different types of people, right? I am not inherently more of an at-risk student because I'm Black. I am at risk because we live in a country that has a culture that ignores a whole subset of its population, right? And so those are the boxes that make us at risk. But really, I think those boxes are just highlighting the ways in which we as a society continue to fail our students at the higher ed level, but even beyond as they matriculate into the workforce.
Agreed. So I would say that, when it comes to what we can do on campuses, now, this is my magical thinking. It isn't something that, we can always jump right into, because again, it is a systemic issue. Policies, having to put policies in place, getting things approved. And if you don't have the right people sitting at the table to get the things pushed through, because they don't understand that it is a need for it, because they lack the understanding culturally and how it impacts, students in an HBCU setting, it's difficult, as we know, to get certain things pushed through. But in my magical thinking, I would push for administration as well as professors to assess like what's going on with the student. So normally a student comes in and we complete the FAFSA forms. You want to know all about the money. What can you afford? What can't you afford? What kind of loans can we give you? What kind of grants you may apply for? And here's your syllabus, go out and do the work. But we don't get to know the whole person, right? So you shouldn't be sitting in my class and I not know that you're a single parent who is struggling with some things outside of the classroom that's going to impact how you're showing up academically. So really taking on the approach of getting to know your student in a way. And I know that can be difficult. There are thousands of students, of course, on campus, but I think having that knowledge and being able to assess the situation without having to sit down and have hour-longs of conversation, but being able to recognize things just based off of your own observation is important, because you're then able to go to that student and find out more. But I definitely think that just creating a system where that already happens, so we can be more proactive versus being reactive, finding out something after the fact, is not always the best, thing. So being proactive, being able to assess students where they are, knowing them in their whole lives and how it's going to impact them showing up, and being able to provide the support that's necessary to them.
And what I hear, one is that we in higher ed, we have this whole concept of we want to develop the whole student. Yet, when it comes to the actual, which sounds good in theory, but when it comes to actual practices, we're not really meeting the mark in a lot of the areas of that whole student. The other piece that I hear is, how are we conducting needs assessment of our students beyond the metrics of funding, financial ability, them registering for classes. Beyond that, how are we assessing our students, getting that information to further help them? And so for me, as someone who has worked in housing, I always say it's not just housing's responsibility, it's not just counseling's responsibility, it's not just the student health center's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility to develop that whole student. It's just that these functional units do certain things that contribute to that. So Dr. Walker, your background is in institutional effectiveness. And so when you think about the missions of our universities, more particularly our HBCUs, holistically, and you think about accreditation and what that means, what are some things that we need to be doing or can be doing to measure or look or assess our students' needs that are not always written in a strategic plan per se?
Yes. So I'm going to tell you, Dr. K, you came down my row. I'm sorry, I'm Southern and raised Southern Baptist. You just came down my row. So one of the things that I always tell my people when I'm working in IR and institutional effectiveness, every data point is a person. And that's really important, because when you're at a Research One institution and you have thousands of data files and you're just writing SAS code, you really get into a pattern of thinking that you're just working with numbers, right? Those numbers are representative. So I think that's really at the foremost of the conversations, at least I have with my IR person, even now. You have to remember that these data points are people. So that's the first part. The second part is, you want to make data-informed decisions and not data-driven decisions. So when you make data-driven decisions, that means you have not taken in the humanistic aspect of how and why this is happening. So the quantitative aspect tells us the what, the qualitative tells us the why. And there is a shift, I think, a movement in data and information understanding to be more respectful of that qualitative piece. And I think that's really how we get to know the whole student. So if you distribute a survey and it comes back and you find out that students who are transfers feel less comfortable at your institution and have a higher transfer out rate than, say, other types of students, traditional or non-traditional, what you have now is the what. We know that the students are leaving our institution. The qualitative data is going to tell us the why. And that's the part that colleges don't want to get their hands dirty in, because it takes a little bit more time. There's a measure of subjectivity, and there's an expectation that you follow through, right? Closing the loop, accountability. The third part of that is, with the new SAC-COC principles that came out in 2018, I tell people all the time, compliance has to be the floor, not the ceiling. If you focus on continuous improvement, you will comply. If you focus on compliance, you're probably going to fail certain aspects of your SAC-COC, or at least you're going to get put on monitoring. And a lot of times we see that in 8.4 with student outcomes, right? So what does it mean for your college to make sure that students are continuously improving, but you're also doing your data management processes in a way that are sustainable beyond, oh, we're just collecting this data this year and we're going to start a whole new set of things next year. And I can tell you, I have seen a college recently in Georgia, a regional comprehensive, that included some of those softer touch aspects in terms of student feedback and increasing outcomes. So students say, I've had a mentor relationship with a faculty member. And I can tell you there was major pushback at that institution because they were saying, oh, how do you quantify this, right? How do you figure out these different measures? It does require a little bit of creativity, but there is an acknowledgement there that there's a piece of students that we aren't capturing in our traditional data sets with first-time, full-time freshmen and completions and persistence and retention. So I really think those are the things we have to focus on, understanding that every data point is a person, focusing on compliance as a baseline, and the utilization of qualitative data to support the decisions that we make to improve student outcomes.
Yeah. And so when you hear that, Ms. Ward, what are some socio-emotional factors that we can begin to qualify or quantify, depending on the factor, when we're looking at developing that whole student and working with that whole student, especially from Black first-gen students? What are some things that we can begin to measure?
So as I, listen to Dr. Walker speaking about what needs to happen qualitatively, when you have the right people at the table, right? So when we think about mental health, right now we're talking about essentially mental health. Like, what does their mental wellness look like? All of these factors that we mentioned earlier are all centered around mental wellness. And so when you have a table full of professors and people who are data driven, but there aren't any mental health professionals at the table or anyone that can bring that component to the discussion, it takes away from what you really are able to do. So when we're looking at self-awareness, how self-aware is this student? If they're not self-aware, they're unable to come to you and let you know what is going on with them. They're unable to advocate for themselves. They're unable to be vulnerable if they don't even recognize, I think you stated earlier, that it is even a behavior, right? They don't even know that this is a thing. So if they don't know that this is a thing, and the professor or whoever's involved in helping them also isn't aware of how to approach it, then it leaves the work undone. So in terms of measurement, in counseling, we utilize treatment plans. And in the treatment plans, we have certain goals that are listed, within those treatment plans. And we look at those every 90 days per se to see how is this particular client reaching those goals. If they are working towards, being more self-aware 3 times out of the week, and they need to reflect 3 times out of the week for an hour, are they able to do that? How is it helping them to decrease the anxiety? How is it helping them to perform better in their businesses? How is it helping them to perform better in an academic setting? So having those questions that are specifically related to mental health, socio-emotional health, which would be self-awareness, their ability to cope, what are their coping skills? What does their life balance look like? What does their support system look like outside the school? Do they have family support? Do they have friend support? Do they have any social supports within the school system? Are they in any groups on campus that could contribute to their ability to have that, support? So really being able to measure those factors would be important and should be included in those assessments of the students. I think I didn't get to read the complete question or statement within the chat, but someone mentioned about being spotlighted and not wanting to be spotlighted or exposed necessarily for what's going on like in their personal lives. And I do understand that it can be re-traumatizing, for instance. So being able to just have those specific yet kind of general, questions surrounding coping mechanisms, support systems. Are they more at risk of failing because they don't have the support systems necessary? Are they more at risk of failing because they don't have the mental health component that's necessary for them to take care of their mental wellness? Assessing all of those things and where they stand coming into the school system is important. And then having those measurements, having that baseline and then having those measurements along the way so that the student doesn't get too far behind, right? So sometimes we don't realize these things until a student is now on academic probation. And then we're trying to figure out what's going on, how did you get here? So again, just being very proactive in those particular areas in the beginning and measuring them as you go along, whether it be, I don't know, Dr. Walker, you can speak more to it, but whether it would be something that's by semester or what makes sense in terms of how often these things are measured.
Right. And so given all of that context, and when you think about the cultures of HBCUs, and both of you have experienced them in different ways, grad in regards to undergrad experience versus a grad doctor experience. But given the culture of HBCUs, we were founded because Blacks weren't given the opportunity to have secondary education, right? So we've been in existence since 1837. It wasn't until 1965 that the government recognized us as actual places of higher education, right? So that's a long time. And it's 2022. And we're still dealing with a lot of systemic oppression, racism as it relates to our institutions, how we're funded, how we're not funded, who comes to our institutions, who don't. So the last webinar series we talked about, this is this myth that all HBCU students are first gen, and that's not the case. We also talked about the importance of TRIO programs, but also all TRIO programs are not on every HBCU campus. And even with TRIO programs, because it's grant funded, they can only, quote unquote, support a number of students. But so for example, if our TRIO program says you can support up to 250 students, and we look at the data, and the data has shown us that on our institution, our HBCU institution, we have maybe 1,000 students that identify as first gen. So what are some ways, when you think about socio-emotional, when you think about the context of the different functional units on campus, that we can really drive in this idea of social emotional wellness for Black first gen students in today's time? And I'm gonna give a point of reference. In the last 2 years, there's been an uptick in racial injustice. And in the last couple of months, there has been an uptick in bomb threats at HBCUs. And so given those nuances, and you think about social emotional health in the Black first gen student at HBCUs, what are some tips and strategies that we need to be thinking about?
First, I want to acknowledge the limited resources of TRIO programs, but also shout out TRIO programs because I am a TRIO baby and I would not have made it if it weren't for TRIO, and particularly out the accounts. I shout her out as much as I can because of the role that she played in my own success. But I also want to say that TRIO is known to meet its outcomes. TRIO is known to be successful in creating pathways for students to have better outcomes. Institutions could scale up what TRIO does, and they don't because they don't want to. The cruelty is the point. When you talk about research one institutions, HBCU or otherwise, the funding sometimes is there. It's about what the college wants to focus on. And I'm not going to pick on anybody else but my own experience. And I love A&T. To this day, I would go back right now if they told me there was a job. But there is a focus on engineering, on building out terminal degree programs. That's where the focus is right now. And when you talk about strategic planning for a university, you can't focus on everything, but that's what they chose to focus on. There are other colleges that choose to focus on building up athletic programs or building up whatever programs. The money is there. I think we lack the political will to scale up what TRIO does that's successful, because it's much sexier to have a thriving nuclear engineering program. It's much sexier to have a thriving football program. It's not that sexy to say our poorest students are now graduating. I just don't, it doesn't have the oomph of winning a national championship.
Right.
And so I would want to start there with, we could refocus and retool and put our time and resources where we want them if we so chose to. Now, not every school, but I'm giving those particular examples because I know that that's where we put a lot of our funding and our resources. The second part, in terms of addressing the sociocultural factors, I think HBCUs do a really good job of acknowledging the hurt of the society that we live in. You even see it at universities where the leadership is more diverse, right? They tend to be more in tune with the factors that are contributing to students, and the students get the opportunity to walk into their psychology class and the faculty member says, I'm throwing this out today, let's talk about how you're feeling. Right. I saw that a lot more in my PhD program at A&T than I ever saw at any of my other two institutions. And I think that says something about there being an acknowledgement of the culture that we live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Going to an HBCU for my master's, the experience was definitely different, and the professors, the empowerment was different. Them understanding, what you don't have to explain what's going on because they know, right? Like they are part of that. They're a part of that culture. They're a part of those experiences, and so there is a level. Wouldn't necessarily say vulnerability, because like I said, it's difficult for Black first gen to be vulnerable in certain spaces, but there is that space. Like you can feel it when you're in those classrooms in a HBCU setting.
Mm-hmm. So now let's shift to, okay, our Black first gen students at our HBCUs, they're on campus, we'll say 4 to 5 years, right? Or 6 years for some. And we as administrators, faculty, how we deem ourselves, are responsible for developing this whole student that we mentioned, right? And so we focus on the socio-emotional well-being of these students. Now that they are moving towards a graduation, because they've been in this nice little bubble per se at this institution where we have massaged, their well-being, you did all these things. Now it's, okay, we're going to release you to the world. What are some transitional skills that we need to be thinking about employing, especially in our juniors and seniors, as they tend to go to internships, but graduate, as it relates to maintaining their socio-emotional well-being as a Black first-gen student graduating from an HBCU?
So I want to talk about some practical things that we could incorporate in maybe senior seminar courses. One of the things that I found just with informal mentoring with students that have worked in my office is we don't teach students how to negotiate their salary. And so they start out lower and they make less money over the course of their life. So I think that's a great place to start. Also the importance of networking. We tell students about job boards, but we forget to tell them that 80% of jobs are filled by who you know and not just you applying. So I think there are some practical steps that we can take that can lessen the mental burden of trying to transition from college to the workforce. But I'll stop there, Ms. Ward, because I know when I am out of my lane, and so I'm gonna let you take it over.
I definitely agree with those tips that you gave as well, Dr. Walker. So with the transitional skills, career options, them having knowledge of like their career options. I recall working with a student or having a student who was I was teaching a social work class, and she said, I want to get my master's in psychology, and after that, I want to go into private practice. And she wasn't aware of the steps necessary to actually go into private practice, and that having a master's in psychology isn't where you stop at to go into private practice or to even practice clinically. You need to have a doctorate, in that. Whereas getting the master's in social work and then getting a license is a different plan, right? A different route. So just having that brief conversation with her allowed her to start exploring what her career options were so that she could make the right decision for her next step in her academic, career. Now, had I not been her adjunct professor and had that brief conversation with her, she didn't know that is something that she needed to, to focus on. So transitional skills with, again, knowledge of career options, knowledge of what next steps you need to take after undergrad, in any graduate programs, understanding core values. I know in social work programs, there are a lot of the activities or a lot of the assignments that are given help with that because it's just a part of the work that's done in social work. But I think that some of those things need to be in other programs as well, whether you're in the medical profession, whether it's engineering or whatever. Knowing your core values is important in transitioning outside of your academic setting. Self-advocacy, so knowing having those mock interviews inside of a classroom so that you're able to know how to speak, know how to advocate for yourself, know how to negotiate your salary, as Dr. Walker said. So those practical skills are very, very important. And when people graduate, when they're lacking those things, it impacts their ability to be successful in the workforce, even though they have this degree. So you'll notice people that have the same degree, but they're living very different lives depending on what was poured into them and what skills they were able to develop while in school.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So now with that, I want to move to how do HBCUs contribute to Black first-gen success at all levels? And one of the things that I want to speak to is what I heard is from a student affairs professional perspective, vision is 20/20 hindsight, all that good stuff. Working in housing, listening to you, I really wish I would have known to utilize my faculty colleagues in social work a lot more in terms of programming for students in general, but particularly Black first-gen students and what that looks like. So when we think about the concept of HBCUs, what are some ways that we can continue to contribute to Black first-gen success in general?
One, I think we're doing a good job. So I want to acknowledge that. There has been a real shift in terms of high achieving Black high school students whose first choices are HBCUs. And I think that says something.
Right.
I think that absolutely says something. Our local flagship university, their number one complaint, we can't get the high achieving students. And their four biggest competitors was a small regional comprehensive within our state, but the other three, A&T, Howard, and FAMU. And I'm talking a huge PWI with $1 billion and can dole out scholarships. And those students are saying, I would rather be somewhere with folks who understand me. So one, I want to acknowledge that this work is having a lot of success. The other thing I think is a collective community being more intentional about sharing our HBCUs and the good work that they do, right? And I think that in turn leads to more success because maybe now more students choose to go there, which creates more alumni, which creates a bigger funding base. All of these things are interconnected. And so I think the promotion of HBCUs as legitimate top-notch universities that are going to get you to the next level, just like any other institution would, is a discourse we need to be having, because then that leads to, again, enrollment numbers, graduation, alumni engagement, and it's like a fire, right? It'll spread, it puts more money back into our communities, but it also teaches our children that you don't have to associate success with whiteness. I think that's one of the big things that I try to do with my own daughter. And I was very pleased when she sent me her list of potential colleges, and Howard was included on that list and FAMU was included on that list. The same schools that are still in all the other high flyers are still in mine, and I could not be happier. And so I think there's something to be said about us as a community uplifting, highlighting, being the messengers, and taking some ownership for our part in helping to promote HBCUs and the possibilities.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of those sentiments. The programming and us connecting. So when you think about different departments, right, on campus, depending on the campuses that you're on, it's such a separation, right? We're not coordinating, we're not coming to the tables together. Most schools have the counseling programs, you have a social work program. So you have people who are in these areas that can contribute to the success of the overall students. They are the ones that can sit at those tables and contribute to different departments within the school system, within the university, and not just within their own department. And so I think that that's very important to collaborate and to connect on those issues, because more than likely you have the knowledge and the skills is right there on campus already. The people that you need to connect with, the people with the answers, like they're already there. We're showing up. High-level professors at HBCU campuses, of course, so they're there. It's just a matter of having those conversations and making sure that there's a collaboration at these tables and it's multidisciplinary, right? There's not just one department focusing on just social work or just counseling or just nursing.
Right.
And that could also be like an institutional culture thing. You know, some institutions, every time there's something, they want to go hire an external organization to come in as a third party. And, you know, everything is like, oh, we just have to find somebody to do it. And so I think that is a shift mentally in capitalizing on the talent that you have within your institution instead of running to consultants to fix every problem. And normally your faculty will do it for a little less than $100,000. And there are real examples like that every day. We brought in an external consulting firm, and when COVID hit and numbers dropped and that consulting firm was gone, they were like, hey, Kimberly, can you come do X, Y, and Z? And I can tell you, they didn't pay me $130. It was included in the salary. And I kept it afloat just as well as the consulting firm had. And so I think there's something to be said about that mental shift where you start to recognize the talent that you have in your college.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I've been talking to colleagues about, especially from the HBCU space, when you look at theories, models, these national surveys that we're sending to our students, they weren't created by individuals who work at HBCUs or attended HBCUs, and they weren't necessarily created to talk about marginalized students in the way that we work with them. So that's one. And so when you hire someone outside, I understand the perspective of it, but hiring someone who has some type of expertise in the types of students that you are nurturing, in the types of institutions that you're working with. And so being cognitive of who you're bringing to the table. So going back to what you all have said previously, who you're bringing to the table for these discussions. And when I think about from the out of the classroom experience and working with Black first-gen students, especially at HBCUs, we tend to silo ourselves. You know, if I'm in Greek life, that's what I'm focused on. I don't think to connect with a colleague in social work to see what role that being in a Greek, Divine Nine, historically Black Greek organization plays on a first-gen student, right? And so how do we begin to make those collaborations across campus so that we're not functioning in silos? One, because I always tell my staff that I can't honestly trust a person who says they develop students but doesn't take the time to develop themselves. And developing ourselves as faculty, student affairs professionals, etc., is not just going to conferences, but it is also having conversations with colleagues within higher ed, within HBCU spaces that may not work in our functional units, right? And so going beyond that development piece of just a conference helps us to truly develop students in a way that they need, that they may not know they need until later on in life once they've graduated and wonder why they're making $20,000 less when they have a little bit more experience in education than the next person who's making $20,000 more.
I want to address the comment you said about making connections across the university. I think, again, that goes back to culture and leadership. That is something that can be intentionally fostered in your strategic planning process, in your succession planning processes, but it has to be intentional. And higher ed has the reputation of being extremely hierarchical, meaning everyone knows their place. And if you get out of your lane, then slap on your hand. And it also has the reputation of being very siloed. Everybody wants to protect their territory. And so when we have to be careful about saying things and not being prepared for them to come to fruition. Because if we truly say we want boundaries to come down, to be cross-functional, to be inclusive in support of a shared common goal, which is our student success, we might lose some territory. Are you prepared to lose some territory in pursuit of this common goal? Right. So again, I think that has to be fostered at that institutional level in order to get it to the point where you're moving students along.
Yeah, I agree. Having that top leadership support is essential. And even if it requires bottom-up leadership to be a little bit more vocal so that it gets to the ears sometimes of the top leadership, so that it is intentional. Because we're looking at a lot of different cultures. You're looking at the society culture, you're looking at Black culture, the HBCU culture, the culture within divisions, the cultures within functional units, the culture within ourselves. There's a lot of different cultures going around, and everybody has their own personal agenda, whether it's negative or positive or indifferent. And so we have to, like you said, be at a space that, am I willing and ready to let go of territory for this common goal? Yeah. So as we wrap it up before we get to Q&A, are there any last words of encouragements or thoughts that you have? And also ways that people can contact you even more, because you're an expert in this space, and how they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, so definitely just piggybacking off of what Dr. Walker just said about the word intentional. My final words on that is that this can happen. These things can happen. These things can be put into place if we are very intentional about it, and we also keep the professors also at the core of that, and making sure that their mental wellness is good and that their socio-emotional health is good as well, and that we are able to ask, like, what are your fears? What are your fears? What does losing part of the territory look like? What does it feel like? You know, what ifs are going through your mind? So we want to make sure that that support is there at that level so that they are able to support the students as well. So we're not skipping over them in that process. You all can get in contact with me via email. It is sward, so that's SWARD @counselfortheculture.com. I'll put that in the chat as well. And you can also visit my webpage, which is counselfortheculture.com as well.
So one thing I do want to touch base on is the idea of nurturing the entire student, the whole student. Um, I think it's important to understand that the whole student might not be as perfectly neatly packaged as we would like. Nurturing the whole student also means sometimes helping them resolve things like trauma, and we have to be comfortable with that within ourselves before I think we can help someone else with it. So that leads back to your point, Dr. K, about professionally developed means more than just going to conferences. The other thing is the recognition of the limits of national surveys and their applicability to students at HBCUs, particularly Black first-gen students. So when it says things like students who don't participate in certain types of activities, high impact practices, are less likely to be successful. And then it leaves out the point that a student who works 20 hours a week has a little bit less time to engage in high impact practices. Those are the kinds of things that aren't applicable to our institutions, which means there's an opportunity, there's a growth opportunity there for us to step in and really talk about what our whole student looks like. And we know that our students who work 20 hours a week are very successful, right? They're independent, they're taking care of themselves, and they're matriculating along their coursework. But there might not be an appreciation for that outside of our culture. And I think the last word I want to end on is we have to be okay with not being mainstream. So what works for our students is not going to work for their students. And a long time, PWIs have been doing what works for a specific type of student and not ours. And we have to be okay with doing what works for our students and not theirs.
Ooh, that
word.
Yes, yes. Ooh, okay. So opening it up for questions. So our first question is, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on how administrations can provide social emotional support for faculty and staff so they can better show up for our students.
Well, we have things like EAP programs. I don't know how much people are using them for their own counseling services and that sort of thing. But I also think that COVID has forced us to acknowledge the humanity within all of us. And if there's one positive that can come out of the treacherous past 2 years, I would say that's it. The acknowledgement that we're all people putting our pants on one leg at a time, putting one foot forward. Now, of course, you're going to see different types of cultures within different types of offices. But I think I would start with my vice president of HR, business and finance, where HR normally falls, and say, what are the opportunities that we have? And how do we better communicate those opportunities on campus? Where are the gaps and how do we fill them? I think those are the things that we can do for our faculty and staff, because we have some resources, but it's a marketing issue. People don't know they exist.
Right.
And being very intentional about what is required. In some programs, in counseling programs, for instance, some of the students are required to also have a counselor. If you're in that program, they're required to go to therapy. They're required to do certain things in order to get the credits that's necessary, for their degree. So I think when it comes to the faculty, already there are, conferences that you all are required to go to, certain number of continuing education that you're required to get. So being intentional about how much of that is focused on mental well-being, how much of that is focused on overall wellness, and making that a part of that process. Because a lot of times if we're having to choose what it is that we're going to do, taking care of our mental health is not at the top of the list until something happens, and then we're being reactive, right? So incorporating that into what's required would be very, very helpful.
And what I like most about this conversation is that if you would have just showed the topic of socio-emotional well-being, Black first-gen students, I think normally we would have expected for a counselor to be in the space, right? Or someone who solely just does mental health work. But I love the fact that we have diversity of thought, and it's not just solely from a counseling perspective, because that also lends to the forethought that it's not just one person's responsibility for this piece of well-being, right? So other questions or thoughts, if you can place those in the group chat or the Q&A function so that we can get those answered for you. Hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. If you have any questions, please place those in the chat or the Q&A section. So as we're waiting for any further questions or comments, I want to personally thank you all for being here, sharing your wisdom. This, and as stated, this has been amazing. It truly has. It's sparked some things in my mind to, okay, got some projects I might want to start working on around this area. But it has definitely been appreciated. You all have been very thorough, transparent in the conversation. And I know that those that are watching the recording will also have some of the same sentiments. And so if there are no further questions, because I don't see any coming in as of now, then I would like to say thank you all for attending, taking the time to attend. We have about two more sessions or webinars within the series of Black First Gen students at HBCUs. So the next one will be next week, where we're talking about financial wellness and Black First Gen students at HBCUs. Once again, on 12:00 p.m. Eastern Wednesday. So be sure to register if you haven't. And as always, it is a pleasure to serve. It is a pleasure to have these conversations in hopes that these conversations turn into actions for our institution. So once again, thank you for attending. And I see a question, how do we register for the future ones? So if you go on to NASPA Region 3, under their event section, there's a link. And if I can find the link pretty quick, I will put it in the chat where you can go in and register. That's especially if you are a NASPA member. But any last statements that you all want to make before we get out of here?
Well, thank you so much for having us. This is definitely a great thing that, you all are doing. I wasn't aware that this even existed. So just knowing that, this space is created makes me happy. So I definitely appreciate you all calling me in to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you, Dr. K.
No problem. Thank you. All right. Well, that is our time. And I hope that you all have an enjoyable rest of your Thursday.
You too.